A very good afternoon to you and welcome to the latest in our series of live webinars brought to you by the HOP platform. So HOP, you can see that behind me there, stands for the Hertfordshire Opportunities Portal. It is a website with social media handles, which you can see on your screen now, that we hope will be of use and relevance to any young people, particularly those of you in schools in and around Hertfordshire. So going straight on today's webinar, we are going to find out what it's like to be a commercial pilot. So I know that's the job that many people really know that they want to be from quite a young age. None less so than my panelists today, who I'm delighted to welcome to the HOP webinar series. So very good afternoon to Karma. Karma, could you tell everyone a little bit about you and what you do?
Yeah, of course. First of all, good afternoon to everyone, and a huge thank you for having me here. It's a real pleasure to speak in front of you all, and I hope to give you all a really good insight into what life as a commercial airline pilot is like. A really brief overview of my sort of career history. Went to school, did the standard GCSEs and A-levels, and after that I went on to study aerospace engineering at university. I did what's known as a sandwich course, so it was basically an undergraduate course, so 3 years with a year out in industry, which was really good. I was working with engines in that year out, so still something vaguely to do with aviation. And once that was done, I went on to do my postgrad, and after that, I worked in engineering for a short while. Once I was in a position to start flight training back in October 2018, I started out as a cadet with BA, and started going through the various steps you've got to basically complete in order to get your flying licenses. And as that journey was progressing, then we had the C word, the COVID, which hit and obviously impacted, I'm sure, a lot of you as well on a personal level, and it did to me as well. And one of those impacts was that it essentially took that job away from me, and I had to essentially continue my training without knowing if there was a job at the end of training, and also without that BA backing that I had initially. But despite that, continued training, finished in about September 2021. And then from there, the industry was just kind of a bit wrecked, and we didn't really know how well flying was going to take off again. But I went back to engineering and kind of recouped, and somehow aviation did rebound. And obviously you guys can see what it's like, in the current day. It's bounced back so much. So I only was working in engineering again for about a year, applied to EasyJet, worked to EasyJet for a short while, and now I'm here as a first officer at BA, and I've been at BA now for just over 2 months.
Sure. Okay, so that's a really interesting history that you've got. We'll definitely delve into that in a bit more detail. I'm really interesting that you've sort of dipped in and out of engineering as well, as part of your progression. So we'll talk about that. Just a bit of housekeeping before we go on. So for those of you that are watching this webinar live, so it's 4:30 on Thursday afternoon. Firstly, well done for registering, and for coming home from school and really investing this time into thinking about your future careers. Now, I would encourage you to make the most of this opportunity by joining live. It gives you the opportunity to interact with Karma as we are going through this webinar. So the way that you can do that, you haven't got to say anything, you haven't got to put up your hand, you haven't got to turn your cameras on. You do it via the questions tab on your dashboard. So on your dashboard, you see a tab that says questions on there. In there is a box that will open out a little text box. Then you can type that question into there. It will only be visible to me, and then I will ask that question. So do take the opportunity to ask any questions as we've got through. I can see the ones come through already, which is fantastic. Now, we are recording this session, so it will be going on probably till about 5:30. So if you can't stay till the end of it, you will be able to watch the video back on our HOP channel. So familiarize yourselves with HOP. So if you're online at the moment, just on your browser in another window, open out HOP into, and you'll find that. Again, if you watch all the way through this and you think, I've got a friend or I've got a family member who really wants to know about being a pilot as well, then you can share that video and they can watch it as well. And do watch all the other previous webinars we've done. This is webinar, I think, number 92 that we've done. So we've covered, in theory, 92 different topics that are quite eclectic. So do make the most of that HOP platform. But Carl, first question I'm going to get for you is, I mean, bearing in mind, I know that we've got some sort of quite young students, but year 7 students today.
Yeah.
When did you know or first think that you wanted to be a pilot as a career?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I find it quite difficult to pinpoint exactly when that came to me. But I know it was when I was very, very young, almost definitely less than like 5 or 6 years old. And obviously I've got my parents to sort of vouch now. They're the ones that told me, and I think a lot of it was from my family background is from India, and we have some relatives that come and visit us, and family and stuff. And I think it was going to the airport as a kid and going and picking up like relatives, and being in that sort of environment, seeing the buzz of what an airport is like, and seeing the big planes take off and land. And I think I was essentially hooked from there. And then I've got some really fond memories of actually going on holiday as a family as well. And for me, the highlight of the holiday was also was always just the flight. That was the thing that I always looked forward to. And I very specifically remember once I was going somewhere, and we actually, after we landed, I was like, oh, okay, great, now the holiday starts. I thought, I thought that flight was the holiday itself. So I really enjoyed that, and I think it just kind of developed from there. And starting school, doing cadets and various other things, becoming more and more involved with aviation, going to air shows, and it all just sort of like snowballed into the the passion and the love that I have for aviation today.
Sure. Okay. You mentioned there you joined the cadet force. Tell us a little bit about that. So when did you start? How did you find your local one, and how did you find that as an experience?
So the combined cadet force is something that I would highly recommend to absolutely anyone, even if you're not interested in a career in flying or aviation. I think it's a really great character building organization, and it's essentially something that you can join, I believe, when you're about 13 years old, or in year 9, I think. And if your school offers it, normally it will have an RAF section, an Army section, or a Navy section, or a combination of all of them. But if your school does not offer it, fear not, because nearly every single region around the UK has what's known as it's called the Air Training Corps. So you can essentially join that, and you'll be part of the squadron, and you essentially have a commitment of kind of spending maybe 2 hours a week in an evening, and you learn about all sorts of stuff. So you learn about like parading and doing like drill and all that sort of stuff that you see all the crazy flamboyant soldiers in, like, sometimes the King's parades and stuff out in the city. So you get to practice a bit of that, and you have really awesome things like weapon you get to go to a range and fire a rifle, for example. You get to go out camping, you get to learn how to camouflage, you have to learn how to wear your uniform, so there's a lot of ironing and all this sort of stuff, and polishing of boots. And it might sound a little bit boring, but when you've got like all your friends with you and you're out there, and you're developing your character, and I have to say it's kind of shaped me into the person that I am today. You have like a certain level of discipline and an interest in kind of organizing your life, and I think CCF played a big part in that. So it's something I'd really recommend, and Air Training Corps is obviously available if your school doesn't offer it.
For sure. Okay, thank you. So that's really strong endorsement then of the cadet force, or joint cadet force there. Jill, I've had so many questions come in already. This is sort of a record for the webinars that we've done.
Great. That's really good to hear.
So I'm only going to ask a couple of my ones, then I'm going to go straight into the questions that have come in. So the question I wanted to ask you is just kind of on a day-to-day basis. You're obviously not flying today because you're here with us, but talk to me what an average day is like for you as a commercial pilot. So you wake up in the morning. Tell us what happens from that point onwards. Okay,
so normally as soon as I wake up, I'll start getting ready, and obviously we've got a uniform to wear, so I'll put my uniform on and make my way to the airport. We've got a crew car park at Heathrow. I'll put my car there, and then we take a crew bus that essentially ships us from the crew car park to the CRC, which is the crew report center, and that's where all flight crew and cabin crew meet and report to just before the flight. and the report time is about 1 hour and 15 minutes before the scheduled departure or the scheduled pushback time. And in the CRC, the kind of things that we do is to have a look at the flight plan, and really what we're looking for is having a look at the weather to make sure that the weather at our departure station, so at Heathrow, which is where I'm based, and also our destination is good enough. And things that would kind of maybe throw a spanner in the works would be fog, for example, reducing the visibility, because then that impacts our landing capability. Strong winds as well, so if the wind is blowing across the runway, you might have seen on YouTube videos of planes doing like landings, and they're all sideways. So the aircraft that I fly, the A320, that actually has a limit on the wind speed that can be across the runway. So that's something that we consider as well. And there's a variety of other things, you know, can we anticipate any delays? Is there anything wrong with the aircraft? Is there something that we need to be aware of that's technically impacting the performance of the aircraft? And we need to kind of take into consideration that might be a slight deviation from a normal operation. So we'll discuss all of that in detail. We'll have a quick look at the customer plan as well, make sure that, you know, we're aware of the kinds of passengers on board, if they're, you know, one of our corporate passengers, or if they're members of potentially the executive club. And that's really important at BA, because we place quite heavy emphasis on customer service, and that's something you might not really think about if you're looking for a career into becoming a pilot. Is actually the soft skills, and the customer service is a huge thing. Customer service at BA, but definitely the soft skills, even for flying, even for being a pilot, is a really, really important thing. I think we could potentially touch on that a bit later. But once we've delved into all of that in the CRC, we'll then walk out to the aircraft, over the jet bridge, into the cockpit, and then essentially from there, as I'm a first officer, I would be sitting in the right-hand seat. You can probably see in that picture there, I'm not too sure if you can see that slide, but there's someone sitting in the right-hand seat, and there would be another person sitting in the left-hand seat. The left-hand seat is always occupied by the captain, and there's always at least 2 people in the flight deck. And we have essentially very prescriptive roles as to what we need to do, and those roles are essentially known as standard operating procedures. And the reason we have an SOP, or a standard operating procedure, is so that we can essentially sit down in those seats and fly with absolutely anyone. Because I could essentially meet someone new for the first time, and then sit down in that seat 1 hour and 15 minutes after meeting this person, and fly an aircraft full of nearly 200 people across Europe and back. And we would both be on exactly the same page. We would know, I would be able to anticipate what the other person is going to do before they've even done it, because we know what those standard operating procedures are. And one of the ways that we split those duties is pilot flying and pilot monitoring. So when we sit down in that seat, we'll say, right, okay, would you like to be pilot flying or pilot monitoring? And you've got various different responsibilities as PM and as PF. A typical day for me would consist of maybe flying out of Heathrow to one of our European destinations, let's say, for example, Rome. So we're going to go from Heathrow to Rome, and because it's 2 flights there and back, we would split the duties equally. So that's a bit of a myth as well, is that co-pilots don't actually fly, but actually in reality those duties are split almost 50-50. However, the captain has the ultimate responsibility, legal responsibility for the aircraft. The actual flying is split 50-50. So we'll sit down on those seats and say, right, okay, I'll take it there and you can bring it back. And then we all kind of disperse and go off and do all our bits and bobs that we've got to do. And once all those things are done, we'll meet back, we'll look at each other, and we'll say, are you ready to brief? And we'll brief the other person. So the person who's flying normally briefs the other person, and I'll say, you know, have you checked everything that I've done? You know, what are the main threats for today? And that's what that really is what a pilot's job is in the modern day, is a threat manager. We're looking for, right, you know, what threats does the weather present? What threats does our route present? Is there terrain that's going to impact our departure? Is there icing? Is there, you know, is there increased bird activity at the airfield that we might hit a bird on departure, and we've then got to figure out what we're going to do in the case of an emergency? So it's always thinking about the what if scenarios, you know, what happens if, and that's essentially the one of the purposes of a briefing. And once we've done that and everyone's happy, we'll push back from the gate, taxi to the departure runway, take off, climb out, and then In the cruise, we're essentially monitoring the systems, making sure that the aircraft is flying as it should be, that it's on the correct path, it's not heading towards any sort of weather hazards, and we're keeping it nice and safe. We make sure that we keep checking the fuel as well, and it can be a really dynamic situation. For example, there could be something that goes wrong at the destination, and that slows down all the traffic coming in, and then we've got to sort of assess what the fuel situation is like. Do we potentially need to divert, or is it just a normal day and everything's looking fine? And we're just going to, have a nice straightforward arrival into Rome or wherever it is that we're going. And just before we actually descend, so from the cruise going down into the descent, we'll have another brief, and we'll say, what are the threats for the descent, for the arrival? Is there anything different to what we spoke about? One, in the CRC right at the beginning of the day, and two, just before we push back the aircraft, just before we had our first brief, is there anything that's different? And we'll fly the approach, come down, land, and then we'll have a quick chat about how we think it went, have a quick post-flight review, and then as soon as that's done, passengers will come off. They'll go on, start their holiday or their business or wherever they need to go, and we start preparing the aircraft for the return. We start programming the box, and obviously we switched roles then. The person who's flying is now the person who's monitoring. And we bring the aircraft back, and that could potentially be the end of the day once we've got the aircraft back to Heathrow. Another option is that we could potentially have to go out and do another 2 flights, or go somewhere else and come back, or we stay in that location in Rome, for example. We stay there overnight, and then we take the first flight back the following day. So sometimes, you do get to get off the aircraft, explore the destination, and come back. And that's the beauty, I think, of the way that BA operates, is that you've got the best of both worlds, especially in short haul. You've got there and back quick day trips, and then you've got the tours and the longer night stops as well if you want. So that's generally how a day would go.
Sure. Well, look, I said there's so many questions that have come in. Some, I guess, specific to the story you just told us there. I mean, first of all, when you say flying, so I'm flying or the captain's flying, I mean, what do you actually mean by that? I mean, you're not sat there intently with your hand on a joystick or a wheel, are you? What's actually happening once you've taken off and you've got to your sort of safe cruising altitude? What does flying actually mean from that point onwards?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because a lot of people assume that essentially we just kind of put the autopilot on and kind of take a back seat. And to a certain extent, there is a high level of automation. And essentially what that would look like on a normal day-to-day trip would be that we would kind of push back all manually, taxi manually, take off manually as well. And normally the autopilot comes in pretty soon after the departure. And one of the reasons for that is workload management, and this is one of those soft skills that I spoke about earlier. It's actually one of the core competencies of being a pilot, is workload management. So as soon as you put that autopilot in, it relieves you of that workload, and it turns you more into a manager. And what you're doing is you're then managing the aircraft, and you're looking for threats that are around you, potentially like weather. And you want to make sure that you avoid weather. And sometimes, weather can look quite benign from on the ground, but if you're flying through through a bad patch, it can get quite turbulent. It can get quite nasty quite quickly. So you've got to make sure that you avoid that weather in the first place. And having that autopilot in allows you to potentially look out, monitor the weather radar, and do other things. Other threats, especially operating out of Heathrow, would be traffic. The London terminal area is probably one of the densest airspaces in the world, and traffic is a huge threat. And there's very short sort of spaces between some of the aircraft. So again, putting that autopilot in soon after is important for helping to reduce your workload, so that you can raise your situational awareness and understand what's happening around you. And at that point, you wouldn't really be using that joystick. So in the A320, we have what's known as a side stick. It's essentially a joystick that's just on the side of where you're sitting, and that's how you control the aircraft and move it up, down, left, or right. And once the autopilot is in, we wouldn't be controlling the aircraft with that. We have what's known as it's called the flight control unit, which sits in front of you, and you've got various knobs and buttons on there which can change, for example, the way the aircraft is pointing, or if it's climbing, or if it's descending, and various other things. And you would essentially manage the aircraft through that. The landings, so essentially, you'll cruise and you descend. and the landings are almost always done manually. There are very, very few circumstances under which you will do an automatic landing, and it will essentially be when the visibility is really low or the weather's not good, i.e. like really misty or foggy sort of thing. But if the winds are really high, normally that blows away any fog, and actually the autopilot might not be able to handle really high winds. So that's down to the skill of the pilots. And different airlines have different policies. At BA, you are definitely encouraged to fly manually if you can. I think we do practice manual flying quite a lot on the line. It's important to note that the automation is there to relieve your workload, and you've got to use the appropriate level of automation at all times. But you can't neglect your manual flying skills either.
No, for sure, I'm sure. So a question here, do you get tired when flying a plane, or are you always not tired? I guess that could be physically or mentally, couldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the main thing to take away from this is that we're all human beings at the end of the day. And, sometimes we've got some early starts. I mean, the first wave, I think, leaves Heathrow at like 6 in the morning. And for that, I could potentially be waking up at like 3:30 in the morning, maybe a bit earlier, in order to get ready and get to the airport on time. And if you're doing that, 4 or 5 days in a row, and you've got long days, it can get tiring. We've got lots of mitigations to prevent that from happening. So, for example, we've got minimum rest periods. So when we get home, we have got to have had a minimum period of rest before we can then be rostered in for our next duty. And along with the minimum rest periods, we have maximum duty periods. So there's a maximum amount of time for which we can actually be flying or be on duty for. So actually, if you're flying and there's a delay, and the delay goes on and on and on, you could potentially be stuck somewhere in, like, again, let's take Rome as an example. I love Rome. And you could essentially get towards the end of your maximum duty period. And if there's no one, sometimes you have a bit of discretion time, but if you even go over discretion time, you might actually have to stop, and the passengers will have to be sorted out in some other way, because otherwise it would get too tiring and it would become illegal for you to operate as a crew. And those protections are there. Despite those protections, again, the company recognizes that we are still human, and you still might get fatigued, you might get tired. So there's no like harm in actually just reporting, right? For example, if you've got kids, or if you've got your next door neighbor that's been making a lot of noise at night time and you just couldn't sleep at all, you've done everything you can, all you do is you just report in fatigue, and they'll find someone else, because we've got people on standby who are there for backup. So in a nutshell, being tired is normal, but you've got to take sensible steps to make sure that it doesn't happen. Do everything you can to control it. If you can't, you've got protections, and obviously you can just call in fatigue if you need to.
Sure. Okay. A couple of questions. They're kind of similar. So one, do you ever get stressed at work? So are there any aspects of the role that are particularly stressful? And then the other one is, it's related to that, is there a lot of pressure when flying to know that you've got hundreds of lives in your hands? So, I mean, is there a point where you think, wow, we're 35,000 feet up in the air here, I've got 200 passengers in a tube of steel up here with me, and I'm responsible for getting them all down to ground safely? Is that something that goes over time, or is that something that's always sort of in the back of your mind as a pilot?
Yeah, I think it's always there at the back of my mind as a pilot, and I think there's one thing that can potentially answer both of those questions, and I think it's the training. Because if you're anxious, or if you're thinking about oh, I've got all these passengers behind me, what you always fall back on is your training. And the rule that I have in my mind is that if I fly the aircraft properly and I apply my training properly, I know for a fact the passengers will be safe, because that is what our training is geared for. The training is always geared for safety. Safety is the #1 priority, and there are so many layers of redundancy in both the way that we operate as pilots and the way that aircraft are designed. It is actually really quite incredible how the industry sort of works in this synergy, and this amazing kind of way. It just kind of comes together and has all these layers of safety to make sure that we deliver a good service. And yeah, I think, you know, the first time I ever flew a plane with passengers in the back during my line training last year, yeah, I was a bit nervous, and I was like, oh my gosh, you know, there's all these people behind me, and you know, I'm still very inexperienced. I hope I can land it okay. I hope they don't, you know, take the mick out my landing or anything like that. But sometimes, you know, you get so busy and actually find the aircraft that you don't think about that. And I think that's a good thing, is just focus on what you've been taught and fly the plane as you've been taught, and everything will be fine. I think it's also really important to note another thing is, I slightly touched on it earlier, is that we're all just human beings, and we all have what we call a chimp within us, and it's very easy to be a bit surprised or startled, and you probably all experienced this at some point, is the flight or fright. You know, sometimes you've been a bit scared and you're like, oh, do I just freeze, or what on earth is going on, or something comes and you're like, right, I can take this on, sort of thing. And that sort of chimp response within us is a very normal thing. And again, we're given tools and techniques in our training to overcome that, and to stop that initial chimp response from maybe us making like rash decisions or randomly pressing buttons or doing something in haste. So we've got ways of like slowing things down, thinking about what's happening in time, you know, in an emergency, for example, you know, which could potentially happen, just slowing things down and falling back on the training, because the training is what's going to keep everything safe and hopefully give some sort of calm in a potential storm.
Sure. Okay. Well, we've got lots of questions now about how you get into becoming a pilot and qualifications. So I'm going to kind of group a lot of these questions that are coming. So thank you so much for submitting all the questions. You know, they're really, really good ones. But I think a lot of people are quite researched that they know that there is potentially quite a high fee to qualify to become a pilot. So can you explain how that works, and perhaps what the ways of perhaps bypassing that might be?
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that, you know, is maybe not so great about the industry, is that the initial cost of becoming a pilot, and there are a lot of airlines that are trying to kind of overcome this initial cost barrier, but I suppose the bog standard way of getting into the flight deck would be to either go through what's known as an integrated route or a modular route. And integrated is a full-time course, and modular is a part-time course. Integrated tends to be a bit more expensive, and it can be in the region of about 100K. A modular course is a bit less expensive. It takes a bit more time to get your licenses, but it's part-time. You can do it at your own pace. You can do it pay as you go. And I'm not 100% sure how much the cost of a modular course would be, but it would be less. Typically, it would be less than an integrated course, an integrated full-time course. What you do is you'll essentially start your training. You've got various theoretical exams to get through, and you've got some basic flying where they teach you the real basics of flying, and then some advanced flying, what they call instrument flying. So essentially learning how to fly in cloud or without looking outside, relying just on your instruments. And then there's a few other bits towards the end of your training. For example, how to work in a multi-crew environment, and also some upset prevention training, which is essentially where you're kind of doing aerobatics and figuring out how to fix the plane from being upside down to back where you want it to be, sort of thing. So that's like a little thing that you do towards the end of your training, which is really nice. So once you embark on either an integrated or a modular course, that's what you can sort of expect in terms of your training footprint. There are a lot of airlines now that are starting what are known as sponsored cadet schemes. And this is a really, really nice surprise, especially after COVID, seeing the industry recover in the way that it has, and seeing airlines invest in future talent in the way that they are is really good. Those schemes are quite competitive, but the opportunities are out there. And I know that BA, for example, has what's known as the Speedbird Pilot Academy, which I would highly recommend everyone to have a look at when you're kind of, you know, when you're at the right age. I'm not 100% sure. I think it's 17 years old that you've got to be. But if you go onto ba.com/careers, you can have a look on the website, and there's an emerging talent section, and they've got everything you need to know about Speedbird Pilot Academy. And the great thing about that is that you will essentially have a fully sponsored route into the flight deck. This is just one of those things that, you know, is really good to see within the industry. There are also other cadet schemes. TUI, for example, the airline TUI has one. I believe Aer Lingus opened their cadet scheme just today. So there are opportunities available to have it fully funded, but if it's not fully funded, yes, it can be quite expensive. But yeah, there are different options available out there for funding as well.
Sure. Okay, so I think that will probably answer a lot of questions that people have got, but take it back. A few people have asked about what's going to help them get that scholarship, and we've spoken about being part of the Air Cadets, possibly.
Yes.
Is that the sort of thing that will enhance? Because I guess it shows that that person is really investing their time at quite a young age into this as a career. So what sort of things would you recommend to really to get yourself to the top of those queues?
Yeah, I think some of the things that I would recommend is just showing a really strong motivation towards a career as a pilot, and that's what you've got to put across in the interviews. And I think in order to show that motivation, you've got to come up with some evidence, and that evidence might be, for example, being part of the Air Training Corps or the Combined Cadet Force. When you go to university, if you choose to do that, you have the University Air Squadron as well, which is kind of like similar to the Air Cadets, but maybe a bit more immersive than what you had in the cadets. There's other things you can do. You can go to air shows, you can join the Royal Aeronautical Society, you can go to career fairs actually twice every year at the Sofitel Hotel in Heathrow. In April and in November, there's what's known as the Pilot Careers Live event, and if you go to that, there will be you know, a variety of airlines, a variety of flight training organisations, and they're all sort of talking about the courses and schemes that they've got on offer, and talking about the airlines. You can speak to people in recruitment, you can speak to actual pilots as well, and get a real first-hand insight into what's required. And I would highly recommend people who are genuinely thinking about this to go to those career fairs and ask the people in the recruitment teams, ask the pilots, you know, what is it that your airline is looking for. So I think that's quite good. But aside from that, you know, just having a real passion. It will essentially develop on its own. You know, you'll read into it, you'll kind of learn about it, you'll speak to other people, involve yourself with like-minded people who are also kind of interested in flying. And I think that'll be a good start. The Air League is great as well. If you go onto the Air League website, they offer scholarships every year. And there are a few requirements in terms of age, I believe, but you can potentially apply for a scholarship and get 12 hours fully funded flying. And it's something I'd recommend. It shows that you've got an interest. It shows that you've done something towards it. And even if it's not that, if you just go to your local flying club and ask to do a trial flight, even if it's just, you know, 20 minutes, 30 minutes in a light aircraft, it shows that you've done it and you've tried it, and you're a bit more sure about that as a career. And you know, there's lots of different organizations that you can join. The Aviatrix project has some great sort of advice and help and support out there for people wanting to get into flying. And volunteer. I think volunteering is great. Volunteering at air shows, volunteering at your local flying club, and just showing how motivated you are to help out and to learn. I think will put you in real good stead.
Sure. Okay. You mentioned a few websites there or organisations. So both the Aviatrix and the Air League, we've got a QR code that will come up before we finish this webinar. So you'll be able to find your way through to that. I've just put in the chat, hopefully everyone can access that, the details of that Pilot Careers Live event, which you said is at one of the hotels near Heathrow Airport. It's on the 20th of April, so it's good timing actually. Brilliant. So yeah, that is in the chat at the moment. But otherwise, if you type into Google or you search engine Pilot Careers Live event London, you'll be able to find that. So that's the 20th of April. You suggest there might be one in November as well, but have a look on their website. I've just had it up on my screen now, so it's probably a good reference point too. Now, a lot of people may go into flying via the RAF as well. I guess that's another alternative route that eventually you could
Yeah.
become a commercial pilot off the back of that? How might that work? Was that something you considered?
Yeah, it is definitely something that I considered initially. However, I knew I always wanted to fly commercially, and that's what I always worked towards. However, I did consider joining the Air Force, and I obviously spent quite a lot of time in the Combined Cadet Force and then in the University Air Squadron as well. And essentially going through at the University Air Squadron, we went through the elementary flying training syllabus, which is the exact syllabus that new pilots who join the Air Force go into embark on. So I got really good insight into what flying as a career in the Air Force would be like. And during my time in the CTF, got to kind of travel around the country, visit different Air Force bases, and get a glimpse into Air Force lifestyle. And I think the thing that I'd probably highlight for that is you've got to be sure that that's what you want to do. I think it's a very specific sort of lifestyle, and a very specific type of flying as well. And I might not be best placed to talk about a career in the military because I haven't done it, but I think the best place to go to find out about that is your Armed Forces Careers Office. And if you just type in AFCO, AFCO into Google, and you enable your location, you'll be able to see the AFCOs that are closest to you. And I think it would be best to kind of go there and ask for some advice. What is a career in the Air Force like? What does a flying, what would my life look like as a pilot in the Air Force? But I believe that essentially the footprint for that would be when you join a military organization, especially like the Air Force, as a pilot, first and foremost, you're an officer, and a pilot second. So you will have to essentially train as a member of the military. So you'll have to go through selection. It's called Officers and Aircrew Selection Center. You'll have to go through that, and then you would start at RAF Cranwell, which is essentially the hub of officer training for the Royal Air Force. And it's a specific length of time that the training takes, and you do a whole variety of things. You learn how to essentially do weapons handling, you learn about camouflage, you learn about field training exercises, and all sorts of things, and discipline, ironing your uniform, leadership, all of those things you learn about. And then once you've done that, you pass out as an officer, and then you start your elementary flying training. Your elementary flying training, I would say, is similar to the basic flying phase of a commercial pilot's license. So you learn how to fly straight and level, how to turn, how to climb, descend, and then you go on to more complex things like flying in bad weather, so instrument flying, where you can't see outside, relying on your instruments. And once you've done all that, then you get streamed onto 3 potential fleets. It can be either fast jet, it can be rotary, or multi-engine. On fast jet aircraft, you're basically flying fighter planes, a bit like what you see on Top Gun, but not quite like that. With rotary, you're flying helicopters. So I believe at the moment it could be like the Chinook, for example, or the Lynx. The Chinook is, I don't know if you've seen it before, it's the helicopter that's got 2 rotor blades, which is pretty cool. And then with multi-engine, you've got the C-17 Globemaster and the Voyager, which are larger multi-engine aircraft. And the Voyager, for example, is actually used for mid-air refueling. So you can have an A330 Voyager aircraft, and just behind it you've got a fighter jet, and there's a pipe that's connected between the two, and they're in the air in the cruise, and they're refueling together, which is pretty phenomenal. And I'm sure requires a huge amount of skill, and that's something you could be doing. So there's it's a whole different world to commercial flying. I think you've got to obviously consider the fact that you're there to serve. You're there to first and foremost be an officer and to serve, and a pilot second. So you might have to make some sacrifices potentially in terms of where you're based, where you're located, where you are at any particular time. But then we have that in the commercial world as well. We have certain sacrifices we have to make. So I think maybe if you speak to an AFCO, get some information from there, and make a bit of an informed decision as to what you'd really like to do.
Do you come across any of your peers who are now commercial pilots who were RAF pilots originally?
Yes. Yeah, I have. A few people on the course that I was on spent a short while in the Air Force, and started training with me. I've also met some captains that I've flown with who had really long careers in the Air Force, and then eventually joined and started flying commercially. And I know BA, for example, have what's known as a managed pathway, where they actually sort of take people who've had a military career and transition them into a commercial career. So the opportunities are out there, but to switch from military to commercial. Now, I don't know how easy it would be to switch from commercial to military, because for military, I believe there are some strict age limits and other medical limits and stuff as well, for which obviously you need to go onto the RAF or RAF website to have a look at. Another important thing to note is that the RAF is not the only place that you can fly in the military. You can join the Army Air Corps in the Army, and you can join the Fleet Air Arm in the Royal Navy. So those are also different places that you can fly, and they have different styles of flying. Obviously, if you join the Navy, you could be flying off aircraft carriers and things like that. And in the military, you've got more sort of helicopters and stuff. Yeah, which is pretty cool.
Okay, good. Well, I think you've done a really good job there of just explaining why you might want to go in through the RAF, but also why that won't suit people if they want to become, if first and foremost want to be a pilot, then maybe it's not quite the shortcut that it could be made out to be. There's been a few questions here about choosing subjects. So just in terms of a prerequisite to get onto a pilot course or to become a BA pilot as you are there any particular GCSEs or A levels that you must have?
Right, okay, so I'm going to read this off the website because I uploaded this before. But for the Speedbird Pilot Academy at BA, it says that you need 6 GCSE grades A to C or 5 to 9, including maths, English, and a science or equivalent qualifications. So you can see from there that there's a requirement for your GCSEs, but there's no requirement for A levels. And I think that's really important point to raise, is that flying is not an academic career. You don't need to be super intelligent to fly. I think there are other qualities in a person that are more important than academic ability. Don't take that as impetus to go and like just relax and not give it your all in your exams. I would say in your GCSEs, and if you go on to A levels and university, whatever it is, give it your best shot and follow a path that you're interested in. So when you choose your A level subjects, even though it's not required by Speedbird Pilot Academy, still, choose A-level subjects that are subjects that you enjoy, because you will naturally do better in those subjects. And then if you decide to go to university after that, do a degree that you enjoy. I did aerospace engineering. You don't have to do aerospace engineering. It can be absolutely anything. You don't even have to have a degree. But just do something you enjoy, and you'll naturally do better in that. And just know that being a pilot is not an academic career. Yes, you need to have a decent grasp of maths. And a bit of mental maths as well, I think is quite important. But it's actually the soft skills that are really, really important for being a pilot. So your problem solving and decision making, your communication, leadership and teamwork. These are all really important things. And all of those soft skills are things that you can develop outside of academics. So for example, through work experience, through if you work at a if you work in a cafe, for example, over the summer, there's so many skills that you can acquire by just interacting with customers and dealing with conflict. And you've got lots of things to do, multitasking, for example, and prioritization. These are real skills that we use every single day as pilots. In fact, we, at the end of every single training session that we have in the simulator, we will sit back and we will get out a piece of paper that's got all of these soft skills written on there, and we will say, right, how did we measure against that today, for example? There's not like so it's not very academic, but know your maths and do something you enjoy, but also realize that there's heavy emphasis on soft skills.
Yeah, because I suppose that's something people forget, don't they? That when you're in charge of an aeroplane, or you and your other pilot as well. So it's not only have you got 200 plus passengers that you're responsible for, that you've got to interact with, but you've got the you've got the crew up there as well, and they will have their own issues and challenges as human beings that sometimes I guess you've got to try and manage. Then you've got the relationships with the air traffic control that you're dealing with at both ends, and then possibly the ground crew as well. So I guess all of those soft people skills are just essential, aren't they? And I guess you are responsible, aren't you? You are the leader of a small team of people at any point.
100%. I think you basically hit the nail on the head and identified all of these stakeholders that we have, and everyone's got a part to play in delivering a safe operation. Remember, I said that's the whole aim of the game, is to deliver a safe operation. Everyone's got a role to play, but if you don't exercise your soft skills properly, for example, if you don't communicate properly, there could be something that's wrong that the cabin crew have noticed, but because you didn't open that form of that channel of communication with them, they've just decided, oh, the pilot might get a bit annoyed, so I'm just not going to say anything. And then that problem develops, and it's something that you could have nipped at the bud a lot earlier, just by having good communication from the outset. So that's something that's known as crew resource management, and that's a very, very important concept within flying. Is to essentially break down any sort of barriers to communication, make sure that the team is working nicely, and as you highlighted, is essentially engaging all of those different people in the right manner, and setting the right tone. One thing that BA does very, very well is essentially what we call the cockpit gradient. So historically, in some places, you had what's known as a very steep gradient within the cockpit. So the captain and the first officer, there'd be a bit of a split, and the first officer would be like, yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir, and the captain would point and do this and do that and say this is what's going to be done. Whereas now we've got what's known as a flat gradient, and it's not completely flat because obviously the captain's still in charge, but there's this open sort of atmosphere where you ask open questions to each other. You try to understand what the other person is thinking, and you're sharing your mental models, and you're setting up an environment for being open. Because if there is a problem, if something does go wrong, you want to be able to make sure that you understand what the other person is thinking, because they might have figured out what's going wrong before you have. And It's nice to have their help and to open those barriers and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, just to clarify from a qualifications perspective, this is based on the BAs on their Speedbird program, but other airlines probably have similar requirements. So GCSEs, English, Maths, Science, grade 5 to 9. But beyond that, really, the ability to communicate is going to be far better than having a degree in astrophysics if you haven't got the communication skills to back that up. So, I mean, I'm just interested. You chose to do aerospace engineering as a degree. Was that just to hedge your bets a little bit? And if that's a career that you would have pursued, perhaps being responsible for making an aircraft or putting an aircraft together, would that have satisfied your, I guess, desire to be involved in aviation?
Yeah, I think essentially at the time that I was choosing to go to university, I wasn't really sure if I was going to be able to afford flight training, or if it was even a viable career option for me at that point. And so I was like, right, okay, I need to figure out I need to do something. And if I am going to do something, I want to enjoy it. And the things that I enjoy are things that are related to aviation. So if it wasn't going to be flying, I wanted to do something that was as close to aviation as possible. And that's why I decided to study aerospace engineering. I quite enjoyed maths and physics at school, and decided to kind of take it on towards degree level. And I also worked in engineering for a bit. And I think, I think I could have continued as an engineer if becoming a pilot was not an option. Obviously, I would always have that itch within me, being like, oh, I wonder what it's like. I wonder what it's like to actually fly. I think that would have been there. But I think a career as an engineer was really fulfilling. I had some great opportunities. I learned a lot, and it developed me into the person that I am today. I don't know if you want a quick overview of what I did in engineering, but just very briefly, I worked at GE Aviation for a bit and Rolls-Royce for a bit, and both those companies, they actually manufacture the jet engines that you see on the aircraft. So I think that sort of background, it did help me. It helped me sort of understand the theoretical side of things a bit more. And when you start your flight training, you have these 14 ATPL, Airline Transport Pilots License exams you've got to get through. And I think having that engineering background helped me to get through that. But having said that, you don't need to have an engineering background. You just need to have motivation to go and study what needs to be done, and you'll get through them. But I'd say, yeah, it definitely helped me get.
Yeah, okay. There's a few questions that have come in, essentially saying, if you don't have the money or you're never going to be able to pay for the training course, what do you do? So you kind of alluded to that there are increasingly more scholarships that are available. So I've got on the screen here, these are a couple of the websites that we've spoken about already. So particularly the Air League, which is on the far left, and then the Aviatrix project on the right, which I know ostensibly is around trying to attract females into the industry, but I think there's some good information that anyone would get from there. So I mean, what would you say, just I guess fairly concisely, just to summarize, if someone thinks, well, look, there's no way I'm ever going to have that amount of money, which would be most of us, to pay for that training ourselves, what would you recommend that they do, kind of in two or three points?
Look, it's a tough question, and I think the thing I would say is, if you really want something, you'll figure out a way of getting there, and there are opportunities out there. And if you are saving up and it takes a bit of time for you to get there, then maybe that's how it is. And maybe it's not something you can do straight after leaving school or at the earliest opportunity. Maybe you work somewhere else and you raise some money, or you do something in order to get you into a position where you can then go and apply. But if you really want it, you will figure out a way of getting there. And there are lots of areas and organisations that we've spoken about today that can provide support and advice. And of course, we do have those cadet schemes that are available to provide a sponsored route into the flight deck.
Yeah. Okay. So look, make yourself familiar with them. If you look on those QR codes, so specifically at the Air League on the far left and the Aviatrix projects on the right, are probably good sign. But the BA one that I put on there, you mentioned that will take you straight through to BA's careers page, and then you'll be able to find the emerging talent, as Karma said, and you'll find details about the Speedbird project. But interesting there, you referenced a couple of other airlines. I think you said Aer Lingus have gone live with their one. So they're an Irish carrier, but of course they've got a big presence over here as well. So have a look at those. So look, a few more questions. I mean, one about the length of time it takes for the training. So think back to your pilot training. From the first day that you're accepted onto it, are we talking months? Are we talking years before you're actually put into the aircraft, in the cockpit, and said, there you go?
Yeah, the shortest time that you can do it in would be that integrated course that I spoke to you about before, which is the full-time course, and that lasts 18 months, so a year and a half. However, it's very rarely a year and a half. Normally it spills over to a bit longer, because you can imagine flying sometimes in the winter where the weather's really bad, and when you're learning, you might not be able to go up and fly. So sometimes you have periods of kind of just being grounded, waiting. So yeah, 18 months is typically how long it will take, probably a bit longer. For me, it took me 3 years. It took me 3 years because of COVID. I had a long stand down during my training. But yeah, I think you've got to kind of anticipate 18 months or longer.
Sure. Okay. Right. So a couple more questions that have come in here. The first one, what was your lowest moment as a pilot? And I'm tempted to say when you take off and land, but I don't think that's what they mean.
No.
So have you had any low moments? The times when you sort of really question, is this what I want to do? Are there particular situations that may arise that find challenging?
Yeah, I think not really while I'm doing the job, but definitely during my training, when COVID hit. I mean, I still remember the day, the 13th of August 2020, when I found out that I didn't have the airline behind me, and I was really considering actually just packing it in and finishing my training, and thinking, I remember speaking to my parents and saying, I don't know if it's sensible. I don't know if it's sensible investing in a training course where I've got no idea if a job exists at the end of it. I was very lucky. I had my parents' support, who pushed me through that low point and encouraged me to just at least finish my training, finish what I started. And obviously the rest is really just down to the way that it sort of developed in terms of the way that the airline industry bounced back, and how I was able to take advantage of that bounce back and somehow get myself a job in the right hand seat. But yeah, that was a real low point. I think basically having that stand down during COVID, and obviously during all the lockdowns, there's nothing going on, so there's lots of times to sit down and reflect, and you're overthinking. And then I think I eventually just came to a point where I was like, right, this is what's happened. It was out of my control. I couldn't have done anything about it, couldn't have anticipated it. But you've just got to be resilient, and this is one of those big big qualities that are really important in being a pilot, and there will always be ups and downs. I always speak to lots of people who've had setbacks. The credit crunch was a big thing. 9/11 was a big thing. Obviously COVID as well. The Gulf War was a big thing as well. And these things come in, like, you know, in waves. And there's going to be lulls in the industry, and things that might lead to low points. But resilience is key. And yeah, just kind of taking a moment to acknowledge that low point, but picking yourself up and progressing and moving forwards is really important.
Yeah, fair point. What's the best place you've traveled to? So are there any particular locations that you get and you think, yes, I'm going there again?
Yeah, actually, just day before yesterday, I went to Oslo, and that was the first time I visited a Scandinavian country, and I thought it was absolutely fantastic seeing the landscape there, with the fjords and the mountains, the snow and the frozen lakes. I've never been to Scandinavia before. I've never seen a country like that, and to see all the snow and the frozen lakes and all of that was really quite fantastic. I really enjoyed it.
When you say you see it, do you mean from your position in the cockpit, or do you mean once you were on ground?
Yeah, it'll be from my position in the cockpit. The Oslo trip was there and back. So essentially, we took the plane to Oslo, got the passengers off, got the aircraft ready, and within about 45 minutes, we're on our way back. But as you're approaching, coming into land, and obviously as you're departing as well, you get some really incredible views, and it's pretty special. Also, as I've just started with BA, I'm now flying in and out of Heathrow Airport, and you come in over the city, London City, and that's also a really incredible special view, because obviously it's the city, you know, that I've sort of grown up in, and always kind of walking the streets, looking up at the planes, and actually kind of being in a plane landing into Heathrow was a really special moment. So that's something I really enjoyed too.
I mean, I'm sure you'll tell me that you're concentrating far too much at the time, but I mean, could you pinpoint things? Could you literally say, look, I can see my house there, I can see where my auntie lives, or I can see that football stadium? Or
yeah, I mean, you are actually focusing quite a lot, and I think on the final approach, yeah, you know, there's this if anyone's interested, there's this road just outside Heathrow, by the threshold of runway 27 left, called Myrtle Avenue. If you go down there, you can put it in Google Maps, you'll get a really great view of planes coming into land. And I was going there ever since I was a kid. And I remember I landed on 27 left for the first time a couple of days back. And I knew I was going to go and land on that runway. I was going to fly over Myrtle Avenue, the place that I'd been watching these planes as a kid for all those years. But when I was flying it, it didn't cross my mind, because I was just thinking of flying the plane. However, into Heathrow, there are what are known as holding stacks, and you've got 4 of them just to the northeast, the northwest, the southeast, and the southwest of the airfield. You've got these holding stacks where planes come in and they're circling until they're able to be sequenced in for a landing. One of those holds is not too far away from my house, just above where I'm right now. And I do remember, obviously, in the hold, you're just kind of obviously monitoring the aircraft, looking after the flying, but you do have a bit of time where you can think, right, okay, this is, just down there is where home is, and on a clear day you can see it, so that's quite special.
Yeah, okay. There's a question here. I'm not quite sure. Sometimes you hear that pilots like it when it's really windy when they're landing, or they like turbulence. Is that true?
I think yeah, it's good fun. It's good fun. I think you do enjoy it, and you do get a kick out of it, when it is a bit windy, especially when you've got a bit of a crosswind and you come down and you have a good landing. There's a bit of adrenaline, and there's a lot of satisfaction as well. But I'm sure there's a lot of people out there as well who'd be like, oh, I just like it, when it's nice and calm and it's a nice straightforward landing, and I don't blame them whatsoever. I think it just depends on my mood, really.
Yeah, I see. Okay. And then, I mean, just talking about preferences, you said you're flying the A320s at the moment, which tend to be short haul continental Europe. What are yours, or what are most pilots' aspirations? Is there, sorry, the lights just come on here as well, so I've gone very bright. Yeah. Does everyone want to fly transatlantic, or do you dream of supersonic aircraft coming back into fleet so you could fly them again? What for you are your sort of ultimate aspirations in your career?
I definitely dream of supersonic aircraft coming to the fleet. I mean, if that happens, that would be like a dream come true. That would be absolutely incredible. There is a company called Boom Supersonic at the moment, which is developing a commercial supersonic airliner. I'm not too sure if that's ever going to come. into operation, but that's something to look out for. Definitely go onto their social media, Instagram page, and have a look at what they've got on there, because it looks really cool. But in terms of long haul versus short haul, yeah, I think for me right now, short haul fits really well into my lifestyle. You know, if you want to be at home more, or you want to be around your family more, I think the short haul lifestyle works really well. You can go there and you can come back and you can be at home in the afternoon. So my Oslo trip, for example, I woke up at 4, left house at 5, went out to Oslo, came back, and I was home by 1:30 in the afternoon. And I've got the rest of the afternoon to myself, and I'm there, you know, every evening really, if I want to. As a long haul pilot, when you're down route, you'd normally stay there for a day, 2, maybe even longer, and some of the trips can be quite long, quite a few days, and maybe you know, that's not compatible with someone's lifestyle. However, that could be something that another person is really wanting, is to kind of go out and spend time down route and explore. So it really depends on your personal circumstances, what your lifestyle is like, what you want. And I think that's the beauty of being at an airline like BA, which offers both short haul and long haul. Once you've served your minimum time on a particular fleet, you can actually bid. And every year we have a bid. And you can bid to fly a particular fleet, whether it's long haul, short haul, whatever it is, you can chop and change once you've served your time on any particular fleet, which is really good flexibility.
Sure. In fact, well, just one question that's come in: when you fly places, can you stay there for a while for vacations? So do you always get the option, or do they tell you on schedule, no, actually you're flying to there and you're coming back straight away? Do you get the option to say, no, I'd like to have a couple of days?
Yeah, the other really good thing about BA is that it works on a bidding system. So not only can you bid to change from like short haul to long haul, you can actually bid to fly particular routes. So for example, if there's if you want to go to Hanover and you stay there overnight and you come back, or you want to go to Venice and you stay there overnight and you come back, you can actually bid for that. You can bid to have a night stop, but those bids will all be taken into account. It is a commercial operation at the end of the day, and there is a flying schedule to be delivered. So we have an automated system that factors in everyone's bids and desires, and it dishes them out as appropriately as possible. And that's why seniority is really important. So the earlier you join the airline, the more senior you are, and the more weighting that your bid has. But yeah, you can essentially pick what you want, and if you're senior enough and the opportunities are there, you'll get what you want.
For sure. Okay, thank you. Look, we have just gone over 5 o'clock. It's been an hour and 4 minutes. Where could you fly from Heathrow to an hour and 4 minutes, Karma?
4 minutes. You could probably do a Paris, or maybe even just maybe Toulouse potentially. Amsterdam would be good. Yeah, a lot of places you could have gone to.
Absolutely. So look, in the time that we could have gone to Paris or Amsterdam, you found out everything that Karma has to share with you about his incredible career as a pilot. I mean, really, it's absolutely fascinating. I'm sure we could all ask questions here for probably for the time it would take us to get to New York and back. To be fair, it's a really fascinating career. You've shed a lot of light onto it. I think we've exposed some of those sort of warts and all of it. It's not going to be for everyone. There are some restrictions why some people may not be able to become pilots there, but hopefully you're all far better informed now as a result of that. So just to bring it back right to the start, if you're not familiar with the HOP platform, please do use it. That QR code in the top left hand corner of the screen will take you through to all of our previous webinars that we've run in the past. The next one that we're doing actually just after Easter will be about careers in air traffic control. So people that Karma will have conversations with on a very regular basis. So perhaps that might meet your needs if aviation is something that you're interested in doing. So do have a look at that. Do share it with your family and friends as well. Thank you to all of you, particularly those that have watched this live and submitted so many questions. I may not have asked everyone exactly as you've typed them in, but hopefully we've covered all those general themes pretty well. But most particularly, thank you so much to Karma for giving up your time for us this afternoon. You've been a real star, and I know that you've really helped inspire and inform so many people who will watch this live and will watch it again in the future.
You're really, really welcome, and thank you so much for having me. I hope I've given you like a good, accurate insight into what, you know, career as an airline pilot is like. And I do wish everyone who's watching the very, very best in whatever career path you take. You're young, the world is your oyster. You can do absolutely anything you want, so grab it with both hands, and yeah, I wish you all the very best.
Absolutely. So thank you very much, and we wish you all a very, very pleasant evening.